Everyone, we're going to take a look at Oracle database programming. This is going to be section one. Now, at least at the point we are in our curriculum here at Bergen, we have covered all of the database design. So we've gone through and we've talked about what is a table, what is a constraint, why do we put stuff in different tables. So all that type of stuff has been kind of explained before. So I'm going to go from the assumption that a lot of that stuff is familiar to you. And in the Oracle database design, they covered a lot of this. So the programming is kind of picking up from there. But the curriculum is designed for you to not teach that first. So that's why section one and 1.2 are a little more about databases. It may feel more like a review if you're covering it in the same order we are. So what we're going to be looking at here is we're going to be looking at pulling information out of a database. Now, the database I'm working on is one that I created, using AI just of songs and platforms. I should have a separate video up discussing that, but this is what that is going to look like. Let's take a quick peek at this here. And what we'll see is we have a songs table, albums table, artist table, and platforms. And I'm going to keep that handy just so I know what the names of the fields are. I've already worked a little bit with this one, so I'm familiar with it. For the moment, we really only care about this for the names of the tables and the names of the fields. So I'm going to move that out of the way for now, just for the purposes of things, real estate on the screen. So first thing in SQL is anything started with double dash is going to be considered a comment. Now, generally that doesn't cause any problems. So I'm going to go in and just remind myself we have a songs, album, artist, and platforms tables. And what I can now do is I could start to pull information out. Again, I would have the other stuff. In this case, I have two screens. So it's over there somewhere. But it doesn't hurt to leave yourself little comments, little reminders, give yourself a little, you can do this messages, any of that type of stuff. Just little notes that you might have for yourself. Now, the first thing that we're going to worry about is how do we get information out of this database? Now, the commands that we're going to be using to do that is structured query language or SQL. Now, instead of like Python, Java, they're very fussy about your format of things. We can do a lot more here without problems in SQL. For example, there's a command called select. We generally will write those in all capital letters, but notice that as long as I spell it right, I type it with, some stuff capitalized, it doesn't care. It's still recognized as a keyword. Now, your company, if you're working with a company, would probably have standards that say, okay, you will write it a certain way. And we should have linked in our Canvas platform, some of the standards that we might use for writing code. For the moment, I'm not too worried about it. But the first thing is going to be our select statement, and that's going to be where you give a list of fields that you might want to pull out. So, for example, if I wanted to get a list of fields, this is where I would pick those from. I would say, okay, song title, code, plays, likes, etc. I can list them here. So we'll see how to do this with one field or multiple fields shortly. And then the other part of that is going to be, we're going to need a from, and from is going to be where you list the name of the table. At the moment, we're sticking with a single table, but there will be ways to combine those back up later on. So songs, albums, artists, and platforms. So let's start by taking a look at what's in that songs table. Now, you could get away without putting the semicolon at the end, but it's good practice, especially if you're going to be running a few commands kind of in tandem, just because otherwise it will give you an error. Now, if I don't want to list every single field, I could just say select star from songs, and we'll get a list of Here's the song code, title, duration, genre, etc., etc. Now, doing this can be problematic if we're writing an application. Because again, the idea here is we're writing this database not only so it stores data, but so it can be used in a game, an application, a mobile app, a website, whatever we're doing. So um, let's choose a smaller table just for the moment. So albums is a little smaller. And we can see that has 4 fields. Now, imagine for a moment, um, maybe you've come through here and you've taken Java, maybe you've taken Python. Either way, imagine that your program is expecting 4 values when we connect to a database. However it does it, consider that magic for now. But let's say it's assuming there are going to be 4 values here. And let's say somebody goes in and they alter this database and they add a new field in. So in addition to the album code, title, release year, and artist code, maybe they also put the record company in there or something like that, or format. Like, for example, Abbey Road might be a record initially or initial release type versus 1989, maybe that was released as CD versus something brand new might be digital, as an example. So if my program is expecting exactly 4 columns to come back and it gets an extra column, that will cause an exception. If you've programmed in Java, you've become very familiar with exceptions at this point. So it can also be a better practice if these are the 4 fields you want, just to list those. But let's start by just bringing out one field for the moment. Let's say I want to see the album title. And you can see those are going to show up. Now, at this point, they are in there in an alphabetical order. That does not necessarily happen. There's a command called order by that we can use to ensure that things are going to be sorted in a certain way, but not today. Likewise, let's say we go into artists. And the artist, and again, I'm just full transparency, I'm double checking. And we'll see we've got these artists in there. So we've got 47 different artists that have made their way into that table. So, but going back to albums here, let's say I wanted to get more than one field. I wanted the album title and the year released, which is going to be release year. Now notice our standard is going to be underscores there. That is pretty common. It won't necessarily break anything to not do that, but this is going to be what is expected. Now, if you are using somebody else's database and they've named things incorrectly, you can only do what you can do. But if you want to select more than one field, they have to be separated by commas. And again, it's going to be very forgiving on spacing, but traditionally you would write that with a space between just for readability. And you can see this gives you Abbey Road was released in 1969. Confusingly enough, 1989 was released in 2014. I think that that might be a Taylor Swift album. Some Shady, 99. Eminem Show, 2002, and so on. So basically, if you wanted to get those things and you were really looking to make sure that your program is only getting the values it expected, you would construct it by saying album code, album title, released year, and artist code. And you'll see that this is the exact same thing as just saying select star. But yeah, so basically, if we go back to our ER diagram, name of the table is albums. And we see that shows up there. And we can either say star to just say, give me everything, or we can go in and list a single field, or multiple fields separated by commas. Now, another thing that you might be concerned about is you'll see that these titles will just take the field name and just kind of capitalize it in Apex. Not everything does that. But if you wanted to, you can change those names. And there's a command called as for us to do that. So, for example, we could go in here and say as, and we give it a name. And I'm going to do this just to start with without the other fields. So notice code. If we say this without the as, it shows up as whatever the default field name is. Now, if you're bringing this into a program, you have the choice. Do you want your program to parse and look through this information and get the field names? Or do you want to name it before you send that over to your program? Either way is fine. But the spot that this becomes maybe more useful is if you do some sort of calculations, which we'll do in a few minutes here. So let's say we wanted to pull out the album title and we wanted to change the name of that column. So you might say album title without the underscore. Now we're going to get an error here. Now notice Apex will give you an error. Now notice I do have a comment here on line 1, so it's telling me on the first executable line, around column 49, if we were to count, that's probably about the 49th character on the row there. It's saying there's an error. Now, this is not a helpful error, but what it's trying to say is, you know, this would work if there was a from there, is kind of what it's trying to say. So what we can do is we can just kind of throw any titles in double quotes. And you can see that does that, and bonus, it matches the title or the casing exactly. So if we wanted to get album title, there we go. Now, one thing, if you've done some database programming, I know most of you haven't, but Oracle versus some of the other tools, they're a little inconsistent with their use of single versus double quotes. So you may run into that. So, but this would be the way that you would change that. Now, let's take a look at one other example here with some of the string manipulation. Now, notice if I say, just show me the album title and the release year, it shows them as two separate columns. Now, if I wanted those to appear in the same column, we can certainly do that. And the way that we would do that is we would use a concatenation operator. And the concatenation operator is going to be these double, what we call the pipe symbol. That's going to be between your backspace and enter key on your keyboard. And instead of the comma, which is going to leave them as their separate columns, this is going to just jam them together. So notice there's no spacing. It's just one value followed by the next value. Let's say we want to put these values back together in one column. Now, instead of a comma, you can use the double pipe symbol. That's going to be between your enter and backspace key. And that's going to tell SQL you would like to concatenate these values. And there they are. There's no real thought that goes into this. It just kind of jams them together. So we can also go in here and we can add extra characters. For example, I might want to add a space. Now, this would be a spot where it's going to get fussy with the single quotes, or single quotes. But we could certainly do that. And what this is saying is album title, followed by a space, followed by the release year. Now, let's say we wanted to make something a little more complicated, where it's album title, followed by a space, and then the release year in parentheses. We can do that like that. So, but again, maybe it makes more sense for you to do this on the client side, on your program, your Python program, your Java program. You can also do it over there if you feel like it. So this is concatenation. Now, a couple more things to notice here. So first of all, notice it does not name the column well because we are doing concatenation. And this would be another spot where maybe an alias becomes useful. So as title / year. So this would be a spot where just relying on the column names doesn't work. If you're doing any sort of calculation, and technically concatenation is a calculation, um, you get these weird titles where it doesn't know what to name it, so it just kind of names it whatever you did to get it. So this is ugly. Notice, by the way, if you have something highlighted and you run it, it's going to give you that error. I'm sure I will do that more than once here, but we could see now we get title year. Now, two things left here. First of all, the idea of null. So we have artist name and country from the artist table. Now, if we give this a run, you'll see it kind of shows us, okay, here's all the values, here's all the values. But we do see we have some folks with an absence of a value, which is null. Maybe you remember that from a programming class. So just keep that in mind. There will be times, and this could cause problems if you pass this data back to a Java or Python program. You might have these values that do not exist. So I'm going to show you something that isn't going to be used for a bit, but we have commands that we can use to count things, and you end up with weird stuff like this. So notice we right now have 47 rows. If I say count how many countries there are, it's going to show you instead of 47, 46, because country only has 46 values. It is missing a value. So just keep that in mind. That might show up at points. Again, me with my highlighting. But it is pulling out a row. It just does not have a value. So now the other thing, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to try to keep this relatively simple. Let's say going back to the album, we have our release year. And we could see that some albums were released before you were born, some were released even before I was born. But let's say we want to do some math here. Right now, as I record this video, it's 2025. So I can, just like we saw with concatenation, I can also do math. Now, if I say 2025 minus the release year, it's going to tell you, assuming you don't highlight it, how many years old the album is. And it probably makes sense to then say, what is the title? And this will tell you how old each of those albums are. Notice again, probably a good spot for an alias. And you see that tells you how many years old that is. So doing it this way does allow you to perform calculations. And just keep in mind, order of operations does apply here. So if we were to say multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, all of those things will be done in your standard order. So, for example, even though it doesn't really make sense, we can go in and we can say, take this and perform this math. So 3 times 5 plus 3 is going to be 18 because 3 times 5 is done first, versus if you were to add in parentheses, we should now get 5 plus 3 is 8 multiplied by 3. So that same order of operations that you are so used to from your math classes will certainly show up here as well. So it's being repeated because I said from albums, but you need some sort of from statement just to run this. But rather than getting into fields, you could do that. If you wanted to, of course, you can say take the release year, add 5 to it, and multiply by 3. I mean, that's a nonsense number, but you can do it. So this is going to be the select and the from. And again, the main thing that we're doing right now is we pick out a single table, and then we're going to pick out which field or fields we want to display and potentially manipulate them, whether it's doing some sort of math or doing some sort of concatenation. So hopefully that helps, and I will see you in a future video. Take care.